Ann Perret joins us here again in the KRQE News 13 digital studio, here to talk about your latest investigation. Ann, thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time to talk a little bit more about this recent investigation you have here, because I know there's a lot to it. You can tell a lot in your investigative story, but sometimes there's even more elements to get into. So let's talk a little bit about this. This is an investigation, what we've dubbed, and that's why there's kind of some quotes down there, is because it's sort of a quote from some of the people involved in here, a cattle guard conspiracy, dubbed this by two ranchers and their attorney. These are two New Mexico ranchers. Over the last 15 years, they claim KRQE County installed 9 cattle guards around their property, preventing them from doing business and causing a loss of income. Did I get that right?
You did, yes. Okay. Yes.
How and why did you start looking into this?
Well, kind of like a few of our other investigations, we always keep an eye on the court records, federal, state, and this was one where we found the federal lawsuit from filed by the two ranchers, their brothers, who own property out in KRQE County, and just kind of, it was really compelling. It was 30-something pages long, just a really interesting read, and you know, they included this map of where all the cattle guards are, 9, as you mentioned, over the last 15, 16 years. And so I had a conversation with their attorney, and it kind of went from there.
And so let's get a look at the map of these cattle guards that have been put up. I know you put this in your story. So when we see that black outline that says stone land, and then you've also got Wallen land, can you explain to me what are the differences here that we're talking about?
Yes, so the Wallens are actually their neighbors. The Stones own about a little more than 700 acres of property, and they've got these 9 cattle guards, you know, kind of obviously surrounding their property, which they claim is, you know, just really made it difficult to really do anything on their property.
Yeah, I know in the story they described not being able to, you know, obviously there's the matter of moving animals here and there, but then there's also the equipment that they have trouble moving here. That in your story.
Looking at this map at the very top right corner where it says Wallen land, and you see that one on KRQE Road T, the one that's in the corner there, that's kind of what we start with in this piece. There is farmland down KRQE Road 70, and when this cattle guard went in, Bucky Stone, one of the brothers, tells me it went in being just 11 feet wide, and any standard farm equipment is 16 foot wide. So that was just kind of, you know, one of those big issues here. This is him, explaining that to me. So just one piece of the income loss, the inability to access and use their land that they're kind of alleging here in this lawsuit.
And so we mentioned off the top that this has been called a conspiracy.
Yes.
And I want to ask to that point, why do they call it a conspiracy?
Really, it's just the installation of these cattle guards over time. Again, since 2007 is when they told me it kind of started. They had asked for the ones that they did have in to be removed. Of course, they had those. Their family put those in a while ago. They said, look, we've got a fence around our property now. These aren't necessary. Can you take them out? Instead, they say the county ended up replacing those, adding 4 more over the next few years. So it's really just the installation of them over time, blocking their access to the land, as we mentioned, which has resulted in an income loss, an ability to use their land how they want to. They claim this is just kind of all part of a plan, a conspiracy to get them to give up the property and move away. What's interesting too, again, you know, you saw the Wallen land on there. You also will see in this piece that an invoice for the 8th cattle guard. Their neighbors, the Wallens, purchased that, and that purchase was less than 3 weeks after their second failed attempt to foreclose on the Stones' property and take their property. So just kind of another piece of the conspiracy, so-called conspiracy, if you will.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, what did happen maybe preceding this, if anything? Could you learn anything about, you know, whether or not the brothers think that they did anything that prompted this harassment that they are alleging?
I love this question because before even hitting record with the brothers, I said to them very seriously, I need to know every skeleton in your closet. I need to know, what did you do to the road superintendent? What did you do to the commissioners? What happened here? And they point blank, very genuinely were like, we honestly, nothing. We've racked our brains. There's nothing that we can come up with. Dusty
Right.
has a quote that I actually wrote down. He says, "This area resides on school jobs, cop jobs, you getting along with the powers that be to survive." That's where I've stepped out of the circle. That's why he thinks, that he's being harassed, is because he's not playing the game, I guess, if you will. He's kind of stepped out of line. So,
And obviously, he feels that this is all very personal to him. So,
yes. Yeah.
So you mentioned in the story there aren't any other properties around where the county seemingly is doing this, surrounding these county roads with cattle grates. So I wanted to see if perhaps you had anything you could tell us to elaborate on this. Are there any sort of ranchers or ranches that you could find, any other properties where the county is installing cattle guards?
This is Quay County. It's a very rural area,
Right.
and driving out there, it's amazing kind of the difference that you feel once you hit their property. It's one right after another, and Dusty mentions in the story, they're putting them in a quarter mile apart, a half mile apart, which also just kind of seems redundant, if you will. But no, driving around, there was nowhere else, and they allege that in the lawsuit. 9 cattle guards on a square mile of property.
Interesting.
Yeah,
and I think that leads to the next question that I wanted to ask you was, obviously you did the interviews with the brothers here in this story. Did anything stand out in that interview? Because as you mentioned, a lot of cattle guards in that area.
Yeah, I think, the only thing that kind of caught my attention was in the interview I asked, how many livestock do you have? How many cattle do you have? That's what these are for. These cattle guards are put in for public safety. They're to keep livestock off the road.
Right.
And I was told 9 cattle. 9 cows, 9 cattle guards. So I thought, I kind of got hung up on that a little bit. Of course, there are other livestock on the property, but it's not more than 40 animals. So I found that pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So, of course, that number has dwindled over time as well as a result of the cattle guards being installed and the impact that they've had. But
Certainly.
yeah.
Interesting. So, obviously, there's one voice missing in this story here. You did reach out, though, obviously, in doing this story. But the missing voice that I'm talking about is attorneys for the neighbors. The county didn't comment here. They didn't want to comment for your story, citing this ongoing litigation, as I recall. But, sometimes there are some ancillary comments that maybe get added. Did you hear anything at all from any of the other players in this who are being sort of accused in this?
Yeah, so there are 2 different attorneys for the neighbors, and then there's one attorney representing both the road superintendent and the county commissioners. So of course I reached out to all of them, as you mentioned, got the almost classic response at this point, right? That we typically hear, this is still pending, ongoing litigation, we're not going to say anything. But what I thought was interesting, because I reached out to get an IPRA as well, and the county attorney was involved in that, a separate attorney that's not representing the county in this federal lawsuit, but he and the attorney representing the county in this lawsuit individually, 2 separate conversations weeks apart, mentioned to me, well, have you seen how many lawsuits that they've filed over the years? And have you seen this decision letter, which you will see in our web story? It's included in there, but it is an 8-page letter from a judge in Quay County who kind of lays out what he calls, he calls them abusive filings that he says the brothers, that Dusty and his dad have filed over the years.
Okay.
And it's just kind of a frustration with, you are filling up our docket. This is frivolous, is kind of what he says. And what is interesting is over the years, Dusty and his dad never had an attorney. They always filed pro se. This is the first time they have an attorney. Well, the judge required it. He said you can't make any more filings unless a licensed attorney here in New Mexico looks at it and approves it. So they both pointed that out, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, so maybe perhaps a different outcome here in this case. I am always curious about folks who file pro se. It is got to be a very difficult argument to make on your behalf in court. There's just so many things that happen in the legal process. So kudos to those who do it. But yeah, difficult thing. So what is next with these lawsuits? I know, or with this lawsuit, I should say, there's been so many prior lawsuits. It just feels like there's got to be some level of discouragement or maybe disbelief that anything could change in this, but obviously they keep trying. So I wanted to ask you, what is next? Is there a hearing ahead sometime soon? What's next?
No hearing scheduled just yet. You know, this is federal court. We know this can take years, unfortunately. And so I do know they're asking for a jury trial on this. They want their peers to be reviewing all of the filings in this case, all the claims, the accusations in this case. So we will see if and when that happens, but nothing on the docket just yet. The magistrate judge just changed. It's just kind of all of the little things still playing out here. No movement just yet. It was just filed a few months ago. So we'll see.
Well, Ann Perrett, we appreciate you joining us here in the digital studio and talk a little bit more about your investigation. How can people reach you if they have any other maybe questions about this case or story tips?
You can always reach me on social media at Ann Perrett and by email at ann.perrett@krqe.com.
Okay. Ann, thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Chris.